Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The morning sun bathed the rolling hills in soft, golden light as Eldon worked the fields, his hands calloused from years of labor. He had always known this life, simple, steady, and predictable. Day after day, he plowed the same land, sowed the same seeds, and tended to the same crops. The routine was comforting, a buffer against the chaos of the wider world that he only ever heard about through the occasional traveler passing through the village. His home was a small cottage on the edge of a remote farming community. It was nestled between the hills and the forest of Eldoria, a place whispered about in fearful tones, where ancient powers were said to sleep beneath the gnarled roots and fallen leaves. Eldon had no use for such tales. The legends of knights and wizards, of light and darkness, had little to do with the practical concerns of keeping his farm running, of providing for his family. But that day, something changed. As Eldon guided his plow over a patch of particularly tough ground, the blade struck something solid. He halted the oxen and crouched down to investigate. Brushing away the dirt, his fingers found the cool surface of metal. He scraped away more earth until an ornate hilt came into view, followed by a long, gleaming blade, faintly glowing as if it had captured the very essence of the sunlight. It was a sword, ancient and beautiful, but also unsettling. It felt alive. Eldon stood there, staring at the weapon half buried in his field, unsure of what to do. The stories of old, the ones he had so often dismissed as fairy tales, came rushing back to him. Swords like this didn't just appear in a farmer's field. They were relics of the past, of battles fought between light and darkness, of powers too great for ordinary men to wield. That night, as Eldon lay in bed, sleep did not come easily. His mind kept returning to the sword. He could feel its presence even from inside his house, as if it were calling to him. When sleep finally did take him, it was filled with strange dreams. In the dream, Eldon stood in an endless expanse of light, the air thick with warmth and energy. Before him, the sword floated, pulsing with a steady glow. And then, from the light, a figure emerged. A tall, regal woman, clad in shimmering armor, her hair flowing like molten gold. Her eyes burned with an intensity that made Eldon feel small, insignificant. "I am Solara, the guardian of light," she said, her voice like the ringing of a great bell. "The world is falling into darkness. The balance has been broken, and only the one who wields this sword can restore it." Eldon shook his head, backing away. "You must be mistaken. I'm just a farmer. I know nothing of swords or battles." Solara's gaze softened, but her tone remained firm. "You are more than you realize, Eldon. The light chose you for a reason. Darkness is spreading, and it will consume everything unless you stand against it." When Eldon awoke, the dawn was just breaking. He sat up, his heart pounding. The dream felt so real, but he dismissed it as the product of his anxious mind. Yet, when he stepped outside to check on his field, the sword was still there, glowing softly as if it had never been disturbed. The day passed in a blur, with Eldon unable to shake the words of Solara from his mind. By evening, he could no longer ignore the pull of the sword. He returned to the field, his hands trembling as he reached for the hilt. The moment his fingers closed around it, a surge of warmth flooded his body, and a voice, Solara's voice, echoed in his mind. "Your journey begins now." Eldon had never traveled far from his village, but now, with the sword strapped to his back, he found himself on a path that stretched into unknown lands. Solara's presence was a constant in his mind, guiding him toward his first test. "The dragon," she told him. "A creature of pure darkness has awoken in the northern mountains. It spreads terror and death, a harbinger of the greater evil to come. You must defeat it to prove your worth." Eldon's hands tightened on the sword's hilt as he walked. The idea of confronting a dragon seemed ludicrous. He was no warrior, and despite the sword's power, he doubted his ability to face such a beast. Yet, something deep within him urged him forward. After days of travel, he arrived at a village near the base of the northern mountains. The people were gaunt, their eyes hollow from sleepless nights and constant fear. When Eldon spoke of the dragon, they recoiled, but one elder approached him, his voice a broken whisper. "It comes at night, from the caves high above. We've lost many to its flames. If you can truly stop it." He trailed off, hope flickering in his eyes, fragile as a dying ember. Eldon nodded, though inside, he felt no such confidence. That night, he made his way toward the mountain, climbing through rocky terrain as the sky darkened. Solara's voice guided him, her presence soothing his nerves, but the fear remained. Finally, he reached the dragon's lair, a massive cave that reeked of sulfur and death. As Eldon stepped inside, the air grew thick with heat, and then, from the shadows, he heard it, a deep, rumbling growl. The dragon emerged, its eyes burning with malevolent fire, its scales glistening like molten rock. Eldon's heart raced as the creature loomed over him, its maw opening to unleash a torrent of flames. Instinctively, he raised the sword, and a shield of light enveloped him, deflecting the fire. The dragon roared in fury, its massive claws swiping at Eldon with terrifying speed. The battle that followed was a blur of light and shadow, of roaring flame and blinding sword strikes. Eldon moved as if guided by some unseen force, the sword leading him, blocking, parrying, striking. Yet, the fear never left him. Every second felt like it could be his last, and doubt gnawed at his resolve. Finally, with a powerful swing, Eldon buried the sword deep into the dragon's chest. The creature let out a deafening roar before collapsing, its body dissolving into a cloud of ash and darkness. As the dust settled, Eldon stood in stunned silence, the weight of what he had just done crashing down on him. He had defeated a dragon. But instead of feeling triumphant, he felt hollow, as though something had been lost in the battle. The villagers hailed Eldon as a hero, offering him food and shelter, but he could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. As he sat by the fire that night, Solara's voice echoed in his mind, her tone more serious than before. "The darkness is not just in the world, Eldon. It is within you. You will face many enemies on this journey, but the greatest of them will be yourself." He didn't understand her words fully, but the weight of them settled in his chest like a stone. The next day, Eldon left the village and continued his journey, his mind heavy with doubt. The sword had given him the strength to defeat the dragon, but at what cost? Was this power truly his to wield, or was he simply a tool in a greater game? As he traveled further, the landscape grew darker, the skies clouded with thick, unnatural shadows. Solara led him to the cursed woods, a place where the air was thick with dark magic, and the trees seemed to whisper secrets of ancient horrors. Here, she told him, dwelt a dark wizard named Malvern, a servant of the darkness who had enslaved the land and corrupted its people. Eldon's hands trembled as he approached Malvern's tower, a jagged spire that rose above the twisted trees. He expected to face another battle, but when he entered the tower, Malvern did not attack. Instead, the wizard greeted him with a smile, his voice smooth as silk. "You have done well, Eldon," Malvern said, his eyes glinting with dark amusement. "The sword is a powerful weapon, is it not? But tell me, what do you plan to do with it?" Eldon frowned, his grip tightening on the hilt of the sword. "I'm here to stop you. The light will cleanse this land of your darkness. Malvern chuckled, shaking his head. The light, the darkness. You speak of them as though they are absolutes, but they are not. The sword gives you power, yes, but power is neither good nor evil. It simply is. What matters is how you choose to use it. Eldon faltered, his mind racing. Could it be true? Was the line between light and dark so thin? He had felt the pull of the sword's power, the way it had surged through him during the battle with the dragon, and part of him had reveled in it. Could he use that power to shape the world as he saw fit? To protect his village, his family, Malvern seemed to sense his hesitation and stepped closer. You could rule, Eldon. With the sword's power, you could reshape the world, bring order to the chaos. You could protect those you love. Isn't that what you truly want? For a moment, Eldon was tempted. The thought of wielding such power, of bending the world to his will, was intoxicating. But then Solara's voice cut through the haze in his mind. Do not listen to him. His words are poison. Eldon shook his head, clearing his thoughts. No, he said, his voice firm. The sword is not mine to use for my own gain. It was given to me to protect the light, not to control the world. Malvern's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. So be it, he hissed. With a wave of his hand, the air around them crackled with dark energy, and the room erupted into a chaotic battle of light and shadow. Eldon fought with everything he had, but this time, the battle was not just physical. Malvern's magic seeped into his mind, feeding on his doubts, his fears. Every strike of his sword felt heavier, every step slower. The darkness within him, the one Solara had warned him about, was threatening to consume him, but just as Eldon was about to fall, he remembered why he had taken up the sword in the first place, not for power, not for glory, but to protect those who could not protect themselves. With a final burst of strength, he channeled all the light within him and struck Malvern down. The dark wizard crumbled to dust, and the tower collapsed around him, but Eldon's victory felt hollow. The darkness within him had not been defeated, only kept at bay. Eldon's journey continued, but each step felt heavier than the last. The weight of the sword, both literal and metaphorical, was more than he had ever anticipated. He traveled through lands ravaged by darkness, seeing firsthand the devastation it caused, and yet, he could not shake the feeling that he was no different from the enemies he faced. His doubts grew as he approached the final battle, the one Solara had been preparing him for, the confrontation with the Shadow King, a being of pure darkness who sought to engulf the world in eternal night. The Shadow King's armies had already begun their march, and Eldon knew that the final stand would take place at the ruins of Eldoria, a once great city now reduced to rubble. It was here that the light would either triumph or be snuffed out forever. As Eldon stood before the ruins, Solara's voice echoed in his mind once more. The time has come, Eldon. But know this, the battle you face is not just against the Shadow King. It is against yourself. The darkness within you is the true enemy. Eldon didn't respond. He knew she was right. The Shadow King was merely the physical embodiment of the darkness that had been growing inside him since the moment he had picked up the sword. The battle that followed was unlike anything Eldon had ever experienced. The Shadow King's forces were vast, and the power of the sword seemed barely enough to hold them back. But it was the Shadow King himself, a towering figure cloaked in shadow, who posed the greatest threat. As Eldon faced him, he felt the full weight of the darkness within him. The Shadow King didn't speak, but Eldon could feel his presence pressing down on him, feeding on his fear, his doubt, his anger. You are no different from me, the Shadow King seemed to say without words. The light you wield is a lie. You crave power just as I do." For a moment, Eldon believed him. The temptation to give in, to let the darkness consume him, was overwhelming. But then, he remembered the people he had met along his journey, the villagers he had saved, the friends he had made, the lives that had been touched by the light. They were the reason he had taken up the sword. They were the reason he had fought so hard. With a final burst of strength, Eldon raised the sword high, its light piercing through the darkness. The Shadow King let out a roar of fury as the light enveloped him, dissolving his form into nothingness. The battle was over. The Shadow King was defeated, and the world was saved. But Eldon did not feel like a hero. The darkness within him was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, a reminder of the fine line between light and shadow. As he stood among the ruins, Solara appeared before him once more, her form glowing with a soft, golden light. "You have done well, Eldon," she said. "The world is safe, but your journey is not over." Eldon looked at the sword in his hand, its glow dimming as the battle's energy faded. "I don't think I can carry this burden any longer," he admitted. "The darkness is still inside me. I don't know if I can control it." Solara smiled, her expression kind. "That is the true test, Eldon. Light and darkness exist in all of us. It is not about eradicating the darkness, but about choosing to stand in the light, even when it would be easier to give in." Eldon nodded, though he wasn't sure he fully understood. Solara offered him a choice. He could keep the sword and remain the world's guardian, or he could lay it to rest, allowing another to take up the mantle when the time came. In the end, Eldon chose to return to his village, to the simple life he had known before all of this. He left the sword in a sacred place, where it would wait for the next hero, and returned to his farm, forever changed, but at peace. And though the darkness may return one day, so will the light.